It's important we look at the facts.
Why?
Douglas Ross is sounding pretty scared.
I believe in independence.
And he clapped like a seal.
Hello there, and thanks for joining us on another Planet Holyrood. I'm Paul Hutchin, political editor of the Daily Record. Joining me this week are colleagues Hannah Roger, who's the chief reporter of the Sunday Mail, and Douglas Dickey of the Scottish Daily Express. So we're a week into the John Swinney era. I don't know what that means yet, other than what we've been led to believe, which is a softer, kinder, gentler type of politics. Hannah, what's your assessment of 7 days or so of John Swinney's reign?
Do you know, I actually think he's done pretty well. I want to say, I think he's actually smashed it compared to Humza. I mean, obviously Humza had a lot of things to deal with during his kind of first period in Bute House, but I think, you know, he's come across as quite sensible. I think he's made his points on, you know, the issues that he wants to focus on, particularly child poverty. You know, he's got that across pretty loud and clear. And at the weekend, he wrote to Keir Starmer, basically saying that he acknowledges that the relationship between the Scottish and UK governments has been pretty honking for the past couple of years, and he would like to address that, particularly if, you know, as anticipated, Keir Starmer becomes the next Prime Minister. I think, you know, he just comes across as a lot more measured and less reactionary and less sort of, I wouldn't say, you know, there's no finger pointing at all, because we can never expect that from the SNP. They will always seek to blame Westminster for certain things, but I think that there's a more sort of, how do you say, like, it's less reactionary basically, and I think that, you know, that's probably what the Scottish Parliament and Scotland in general needs from its politicians at the moment. But that's just my opinion. I don't know what you guys think.
Yeah, Hannah, I think that obviously Humza was dealt a really bad hand in the sense that as soon as he came in, he had all the Operation Branch Form stuff, which really just knocked him for six, and it just dominated his first ministership for weeks. Swinney hasn't had that, but yet still, he's just bringing a greater focus and clarity to government, I think. Hannah, what do you make of the more emollient tone that he's adopted? You know, reaching out to political opponents and talking about shared solutions and cooperation. Clearly, he has to do that because he's leading minority government, but he does seem to have dialed it down a little bit.
Well, yeah, that's what I'm saying. It's less sort of reactionary and less, you know, he doesn't seem to be in attack mode as quite as much as, you know, Humza and Nicola Sturgeon both have been. And you know, we'll see how long it lasts. I thought it was, you know, a nice sort of gesture that when he, you know, took over as First Minister in his speech in Parliament, you know, afterwards he went over and shook the hands of every party leader. I thought that was a really nice sort of, I guess, gesture. And it sort of exemplified clearly the way that he wants to lead government. I don't know what both of you think, but I get the feeling, right, that John Swinney, you know, has been the sort of humble and loyal deputy for a long time, and he's always been in the party and sort of, but not in the sort of leading position. So he's supported all these decisions that have happened under, you know, Nicola Sturgeon, Alex Salmond, Humza. He's just kind of quietly nodding along. But now it's his turn in the driver's seat, and he's just come in and been like, right, all of these things that you've been doing have been wrong, and I'm going to show you how to do it, type thing. I just feel like he's maybe been waiting for this chance, or, you know, I just feel like it's a culmination of a lot of like his experience and a lot of his observations over the past 20 odd years. And he's like, right, I'll show you how to do it.
Yeah, I do think that people say, well, look, he resigned in failure last time. He's been part of the last 17 years. But the other side of the coin is that he's an experienced guy. He knows what sort of leadership works, what sort of leadership doesn't work. And I do think that, I mean, I'm not going to say he's going to be a roaring success, but I think he's the only person really in the SNP at this moment in history who could lead them at this time. I just don't think there's anyone else with his skill set. How about you, Dougie? What do you make of the first week? Are you a Swinney fan so far?
It kind of reminds me, I come on here quite a lot and I say that people are looking for boring leadership, and I think we've got a boring man for exciting times, and on the surface of it I think that might look quite good to a lot of people, but I find his kind of conciliatory tone a bit ironic, given that the kind of divisions and the toxicity that exists at Holyrood, lies predominantly at the door of his party and people he was happy to serve in government for a long time, including Alex Salmon. I'm not sure saying he's had a better start than Humza Yousaf, as you said, the Operation Branch from stuff that Yousaf had to deal with, but I mean, it wouldn't be difficult.
I was going to say that I don't think it would be hard to have a better start than Humza.
Than Humza Yousaf. I mean, I'd laugh at your story, Paul. I thought it was a great story about the pin badge. He's kind of removed.
Oh yeah. Well,
removed his.
It was. Let's just say it was online only.
Yeah. He's retired.
I didn't see that. I'm sorry.
He's retired his SNP pin badge for a saltire one in an effort to reach out. I'm not quite sure why he needs to tell everyone. We all know he's Scottish. I don't think he needs to advertise it, and we all know he's the SNP leader as well. So, I think ultimately, the tactics that he's using, this kind of nice guy Swinney, is very much because he knows the situation the SNP government's in, and I mean, you've seen it yesterday. They lost a vote, first time in 3 years, I think, and they would have lost that. I know we'll come to the House in emergency, but they would have lost that vote as well had they not eventually kind of backtracked on it. Of course, they voted against it last year. So, I mean, I don't think he's doing it out of any real desire to heal the divisions that, the SNP is primarily responsible for causing in Scottish politics. I think he's doing it purely for practical reasons. He is obviously a really experienced guy. I think the kind of softly spoken public image isn't maybe in keeping with what he's like behind the scenes. I mean, he's a very astute guy. He's been a politician for a long time.
Do you not think, Dougie, that it's a sign of quite an accomplished politician? You've got different gears. You can go up, you can go down, you can be aggressive, and then when circumstances change, you have to reach out. I mean, otherwise, if you do the same thing that you did in the 70s and you adopt the same approach, then you're basically Jeremy Corbyn.
Yeah, no, I mean... well, 70s, 50s...
I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Well, I mean, you could... I feel like there must be another example that's not Jeremy Corbyn.
He just came to my mind,
Yeah. But, I think you were right, Paul, when you said he's probably the only person right now that can hold the SNP together at Holyrood because he's got that respect. But I don't think voters and everyone else should forget that he's played a role, a really active role in every SNP government up until the Yousaf debacle, and his fingerprints are in an awful lot of things that went wrong as well, especially when he was Education Secretary. So,
do you think, Dougie? Do you think that the opposition parties feel like they have to pull their punches just now? Given that Swinney has changed the tone, they don't want to be seen to be the ones who are, indulging in the yaboo politics. Yeah,
maybe. I think the problem for Swinney is, he's kind of wanting to do this quieter politics. Well, it's actually a problem for him, and it's a bonus for him, because on the one hand, opposition parties at Holyrood I'll feel we've taken 17 years of absolute, nonsense from the SNP and their supporters. Why should we suddenly help you out? But I think you're right. What voters want to see, what your average punter on the street, they want to see them getting on with the job at hand. The problem is they don't. I mean, again, we'll come to the housing emergency. It feels a bit like a talking shop at the moment, and I think the real acid test for Swinney is, will be when they come to, when he puts forward plans for action rather than just talking, and that will be when he'll really need to reach out and he'll need other votes to get through. I've noticed the Greens, an absolute plethora of Green press releases coming through, obviously enjoying their time suddenly with a wee bit of freedom again. The MSP group, Patrick Harvey and Lorna Slater, I'm sure aren't enjoying their time, but I think the rest of them are, and he'll even, Swinney will have his work cut out even to win them over in a lot of things. So it'll be fascinating to see how he kind of navigates this minefield.
And one of the main stories this week was the Scottish Government admitting that there's a housing emergency. Now, the backdrop to this is that various councils have already declared a local housing emergency. You've got 10,000 kids in temporary accommodation, record homelessness. You've got a house building slump, young people struggling to get onto the housing ladder. What do you make of just the idea of declaring an emergency? Because some folk might say it's a bit cynical, it's just two words, and folk will want to know what action is going to be backing this up.
Well, I think that's right. You can say I've said it before about, declaring a climate emergency. We can declare these things all we want, but if nothing actually happens, then it doesn't, it doesn't mean anything. It doesn't change anything. I think, declaring a housing emergency, if it leads to, more councils having to, this is the problem though, the onus cannot only be on councils, because councils have no money to spend. So that, I'm already seeing people talking about, there's going to have to be library closures, swimming pool closures, job losses, across councils. They just simply don't have the money and the resources to deal with this. So if there's going to be any more expectation put on them because of this so-called, declared emergency, then the government are going to have to step up and, as Dougie says, actually, put some policies into practice or new policies and put some money behind this emergency to try and address it, because otherwise I don't really see how councils can be expected to tackle this by themselves.
Aren't they sort of walking into a political punch here? They're saying, oh look, there is an emergency, and folk will say, well, you cut 196 million from the affordable housing budget, you've contributed to that emergency, you've starved councils of resources. This ultimately comes down to money, and you've chosen not to prioritise housing. So, well,
yeah, obviously the £200 million cut to the housing to housing is, it just seems almost like they've got a bit of a brass neck. The £200 million cut, and then Humza did that weird thing, right before he quit, where he went up to Dundee, was it, and said, oh, we're putting 80 million into the housing budget. And I was like, wait a minute.
I forgot about that. What an
that was just absolutely bizarre. And everyone's like, wait a minute, do you think we're all thick? Like, you can't say that you're investing 80 million when you've cut 200 million. It's just bonkers. So yeah, I think there's a bit of careful sort of, or maybe not so careful sort of spinning going on of how much the government is actually to blame for this. And yeah, you're right. Like, if they're cutting 200 million from the budget, it seems a bit bitch to then say, oh look, there's a housing emergency, and act as if it's not any of your own doing.
Dougie, do you sense that on things like this, that Swinney is maybe subtly or not too subtly throwing the Yousaf administration under the bus?
Yeah, by the way, absolutely. I think he recognises that Yousaf was a complete disaster. He recognises that cutting that housing budget kind of, I mean, that was a godsend to Labour. It was such an open goal for Labour, and they've taken it to a certain extent. I mean, the whole thing, you know, Hannah hit the nail on the head. You know, the climate emergency, the housing emergency. My immediate reaction to this is to look out the Alan Partridge gif of him shrugging his shoulders and just say, so what? You know, this means, this is just so politicians can sit and pat themselves in the back. That's how it feels like to, you know, people looking in. It means nothing. It means absolutely nothing. It maybe puts the onus on them to do a bit more, but are they going to do it? I just think I actually think the whole thing's a bit of a nonsense. And you know, I mean, ultimately, it's only a few months since the SNP said there was no emergency. Even though I do agree that he has thrown Yousaf under the bus a little, I think it'd be more interesting if they still had the Greens on side and Swinney was in charge. Would they have done it, or did they just want to avoid another humiliating government defeat? It's a pretty, you know, it's a bit of political gameplay from Labour as well. They know themselves, just saying these words, there is a climate. I mean, them, they can do it, I could do it and sit here. You know, there is a climate emergency, there is a housing emergency. It doesn't mean anything's going to change. It just, and you know, this is a real problem with Holyrood at the time. It's just such a talking shop. And, you know, we've had years of kind of stage managed, you know, questions from SNP politicians to First Ministers, and then this kind of game playing for Labour. And I get it, you know, every party does it, and it's part of the process. But it's just, you know, the public just must look at it, or I certainly look at it and just shake my head and think, you know, what's this all about? People need action. They don't need, not even warm words. These are just, they're just letters, you know, flung together. It's just it's something that really grinds my gear a wee bit.
Clearly. Hannah, just a different subject.
Sorry, I was having a hunger emergency.
I'll do some talking while you cure your hunger emergency.
Thanks. No, it's okay. What were you going to ask?
Well, Swinney clearly wants to focus on the future and his priorities, but inevitably he's going to get bogged down with some of the scandals and the dodgy legacies of his predecessors. One of those things is DRS, which was
my favourite subject.
Yes, indeed.
I think, honestly, if I went on Mastermind, the Scottish DRS scheme would be my specialist subject.
I think that would be the most boring mastermind in the history of the competition.
I'm an avid Mastermind watcher, but I think even I'd give that episode a miss.
No, it would be great.
I'd tune in for your general knowledge section. There you go.
Okay, thanks.
I think I'd rather watch Songs of Praise. But anyway, back to DRS.
That's off the pair of you.
I mean, it's a tedious subject, but we have to discuss it.
It's a great subject.
Talk us through your Sunday Mail story about Biffa and DRS and why it's important.
You mean our exclusive Sunday Mail expose of what's going on? No, so...
Okay, let me try that again. Your exclusive investigation in the Sunday Mail. Run us through it and why it's important.
Thanks. Well, it's very important because it just highlights again the complete incompetence of the management of this scheme. And I will say it again, the incompetence of Lorna Slater in running the scheme or failing to run the scheme, and also still failing to accept any responsibility for it whatsoever. But in case anyone didn't see the story, basically Biffa, the company that was contracted to collect all the sort of empty bottles and cans and things as part of the deposit return scheme. Obviously, they invested a huge amount of money to prepare for the scheme. And then when the scheme was cancelled, their investment was essentially wasted. So they have now launched legal action against the Scottish Government to try and recover that investment. And clearly, you know, the Scottish Government feel as if it's Westminster's fault that the scheme didn't go ahead. Therefore, you know, they're blaming Westminster, but it'll be interesting to see how this plays out, because I don't really think in court they're going to be able to use a defence that it's someone else's fault when it was their own scheme. But interestingly, sources told me that part of their court action, part of the claim, they're referencing specifically that they were given reassurances personally from Lorna Slater that the scheme was going to go ahead, which gave them confidence to invest that huge amount of money. I think it was £55 million. So, I mean, she can continue to pretend that it's nothing to do with her and it's not her fault, but Lorna Slater is now being named as, someone who's responsible for this lawsuit. I just think it's appalling, and it might seem harsh. People might think, oh, you've got a real issue with Lorna Slater. It's not about Lorna Slater as a person. I've got a real issue with, politicians and ministers failing to take responsibility when things are quite clearly their responsibility. It's the same as Michael Matheson, and why I get so angry about that, because I just felt like, it's quite clear that something has gone wrong here. He's misled people in some way, and he should not be fit to be a minister, and yet he continued for 3 months. And it's the same with Lorna Slater. I'm gobsmacked that she was able to completely avoid, so far anyway, any sort of real scrutiny of the mishandling of this whole policy. Anyway, that's my rant over.
Clearly, while there's an SNP and Tory governments both sides of the border, this issue is not going to be resolved because, it's dead in the water right now. Do you think, Hannah, if Keir Starmer gets in, that Labour and the SNP can maybe do a deal in this, like scale it back, maybe a more modest scheme? Because it seems, surely we can get deposit return scheme up and running if we can.
Well, yeah, the whole issue is around glass. But the bizarre thing was the company that was, tasked with running the scheme in Scotland or administering the scheme did acknowledge that the scheme could go ahead in Scotland without glass. But yet Lorna Slater claims that, she was forced to abandon the scheme because the UK government refused to allow glass to be included. I think, there are still these issues around what materials are going to be included, but, certainly there's no reason why we can't get a deposit return scheme up and running. But as you say right now, I think there's just too much blame on both sides. Yeah.
Dougie, obviously, historians are going to pore over the Green role in the Scottish Government over the last few years, but Lorna Slater's handling of DRS, that is very far from their finest moment.
No, it's been pretty disastrous. And at the heart of this, ultimately could be, I think, Hannah, your story said it's £150 million that they're suing the Scottish Government for, because they're suing on potential profits as well. This is public money. This is taxpayer money. This is money that could have been used to go to housing, for example, ultimately. And I think, the point Hannah made there was really important. When you say, could a deal be done between, Labour and the SNP if Keir Starmer gets in? There was, for a scaled back DRS, there was no reason not to press ahead with a scaled back DRS. It was more important for Lorna Slater, and I think it was more important for Humza Yousaf to try and create this additional grievance and additional division with the UK government, rather than press ahead with some sort of DRS scheme. And I think that says an awful lot about Lorna Slater. I'm on record in this show as saying I think she is potentially the worst Scottish Government minister we've ever seen, and that's there are plenty of candidates for that, but she was just an absolute disaster. And I think John Swinney's been avoided a headache, because if she was still in government right now and he'd taken charge, I think he would need to sack her, surely. Or maybe that might have been a good thing for him. Maybe that might have been, a way for him to kind of stamp his authority, because she was just a bizarre period in Holyrood history when Lorna Slater was a minister. The Greens as a whole, I think Patrick Harvey's obviously, in terms of the Express point of view, Patrick Harvey is pretty much stands for everything Express is for, against everything Express is for. But people can recognise that he's been there a while, and he could be quite effective. But Lorna Slater was just dreadful, awful.
And part I would make as well is when Holyrood cannot deliver things like a deposit return scheme, it does sort of damage the institution. People want to see delivery of pretty basic policies like this. And if you need to scale it back, if you need to compromise, then you should do that. And it's just a disaster from beginning to end.
They should declare a DRS emergency. That'll certainly sort everything out.
Yes.
I definitely think with the DRS, there was a lot of problems before the whole UK government Internal Market Act exemption issue even came about. And this might be me being very, very cynical, but I feel like there was all these issues beforehand. The Scottish government, Lorna Slater wasn't really addressing the issues that businesses had, that they were saying, logistics and investment and, the damage that it could do to their, their businesses right after the pandemic. And I feel like the Scottish government maybe saw the issue or a potential, grievance with the UK government as a bit of an out as to why they couldn't go ahead with the scheme. That's just my sort of, very cynical reading of it. But I feel like they wanted a reason not to do it because of the amount of problems there were.
All right, I don't think we've got time for the final subject, which was the Rishi Sunak speech. So let's go straight to good week, bad week. Dougie, starting with you.
So for good week, I've went for unionists everywhere who've been told one of the most extraordinary stories I think I've ever read. Emma Roddick, a former government minister, said that Scotland could leave the union and then join the union again in a quite bizarre interview with the National. She said that after independence we could look at a fresh union with England, Wales and Ireland. She said, I'm sure the people in the Republic of Ireland might have might raise an eyebrow to that, but I just thought it was such a bizarre story and maybe a sign of desperation among the SNP ranks. That's very much you can have independence but we'll still be part of the UK. And I don't know what you guys thought. I just thought it was a complete, just really strange thing for her to say. For bad week, I decided to look a bit further afield in Holyrood. I think it was a bad week for Eurovision, where we had the spectacle of these pro-Palestinian protests at the Israeli act. I have to confess, I'm not much of a Eurovision fan normally, but I found the whole thing quite fascinating this year. I don't really know why. I think it was the idea that this kind of 20-year-old singer was somehow complicit with, kind of perceived crimes of the IDF. And I read one person say that if you watch Eurovision, then you're complicit in genocide. And I kind of felt that that's why a lot of people turn off for these protests, because people make absolutely ludicrous accusations like that. So it wasn't a great week for them.
I wasn't watching Eurovision. I watched Baby Reindeer instead.
Oh,
I
was watching Eurovision.
Were you?
Yes, and I was very pleased that a non-binary person received so many votes and went on to win. That's my take on it. Anyway, good week for me is John Swinney, for all the reasons that we kind of previously mentioned. I do think he's had a really good first week as First Minister, and I think that he's kind of giving us a bit of stability at the moment when we've had so much chaos in government lately. And my bad week is also going for the obvious Lorna Slater, for, again, all the reasons we previously mentioned. But, it can't be great that your own sort of incompetence could potentially cost the taxpayer up to 150 million quid. But fair play to her for having the brass neck to still refuse to take any responsibility.
Can't see you getting the Lorna Slater exit interview, Hannah.
No.
It'd be a good interview though if it was ever granted. I would read it.
Now I would watch that as opposed to Mastermind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But you know, that's the other thing though that's appalling. I just think like politicians, you know, I find more frequently now are just refuse to be interrogated by people, by journalists that they think are not going to be particularly, you know, easy interviews, or, you know, she should actually be speaking to me and I can say, right, well, you know, why have you done this, this and this?
We should get her on the show, Paul. Get her on to defend herself.
Might extend an invitation. Good idea. All right, okay, that wraps it up. Thank you again to Hannah and to Dougie. Hope everyone enjoyed that. Please join us again next week for another Planet Holyrood. Cheers.
It's important we look at the facts.
Why?
Douglas Ross is sounding pretty scared.
I believe in independence.
And he clapped like a seal.